Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatzky. Thanks so much for joining me today on HerMoney, where we talk about personal finance and how money touches everything in our lives. The 50-30-20 budgeting rule. Yes, I know it's a mouthful, but it is one of the most popular budgeting methods. You may not know this. This is really good trivia. It was actually created by Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, that Elizabeth Warren 20 some years ago. If you've never heard of it, it says half your income should go toward your needs, things like your rent, your mortgage, your car, food, grocery food, by the way. 30% should go to your wants. That would be vacations, flights, streaming services, and the remaining 20%, that's money that you got to stash away. That's your emergency fund, it's your retirement account, or that you use to pay down high interest rate debt. But the thing is, like many rules, this one should be used as a framework. And there are tons of budgeting methods out there. You've probably heard me talk about backwards budgeting, which is the way I do it. We'll get to that in a second. Budgeting is not one size fits all. It's not even one size fits most. It's about what works for you and your family and your mindset, especially now when everything from eating out to home repairs feels more expensive than ever before. Some financial advisors are even saying that 60-30-10 may be the new 50-30-20, especially if you live in a big city like New York or in LA. And that's because, according to the folks at Moody's Analytics, while incomes have jumped by 77% since 1999, rents have almost jumped by double that amount, 129%. So while saving 20% of your income or using it to pay down debt is an amazing accomplishment, it's also not always possible depending on where you're located. It may also take some time to build up to that. And depending on your life circumstances, there will certainly be times when you need to give yourself a little bit of leeway, and that's totally okay. Today, I am joined by another personal finance expert who has his own thoughts about how to manage and budget your money. Sean Pyles is the producer and host of the Smart Money podcast from NerdWallet. Yep, turn to the nerds, where he is joined by experts to answer real-world financial questions and help you work toward your goals faster and manage your money a little bit smarter every single day. He's also a great personal finance writer. His work has appeared in USA Today and the New York Times, among other places, and I'm going to get his hot take on budgeting and how to find a method that works for you. Then he's going to help me answer a few of our mailbag questions. Sean, welcome to the show. Nice to see you.
Oh, Jean, thank you so much for having me.
So, budgeting. What is your take on budgeting in general?
I think it's important for everyone to understand where their money is going. But when you say budgeting, you see people's eyes just glaze over and they don't want to engage with it because it sounds very unfun. It sounds a lot like homework. And you're right that sometimes the 50-30-20 budget can feel out of sync with people's current expenses. But I think it is a good way to get a baseline for where your money is going and whether or not you're able to actually accomplish what you want with your finances, given the money you have coming in.
I heard that you actually go further than this, that you think budgeting can be fun. I don't know that I've ever put the F word with budgeting.
I think it can be fun in the way where it can almost gamify where your finances are going. And I get a lot of satisfaction out of categorizing my income. I am a big proponent of the spending and savings bucket method, where I have different savings accounts for different goals, for example. And using the 50-30-20 budget, I do the same thing with my income and expenses. I'm able to categorize where my income is going, how I'm covering certain costs, and I like tinkering with it and seeing how everything fits together nicely. And that just scratches a sort of like almost OCD itch in my brain. So in that way, it's fun. But I realize not everyone is going to find it fun in the way that maybe I do.
Look, I got to cop to the fact that I kind of like it too. I do it differently. I budget backwards, and for me, what that means is that I save first and then categorize. And in our finance fix course where we work with a small group of people for 8 weeks to help them reset their budget and meet their goals. We do it that way. We start with their expenses and build a plan around what's left over after they meet their expense needs and their savings goals. And we do it this way. We have people sort of follow their own money, see where it's going today in order to make changes about where they want it to go tomorrow. Because we found that creating sort of a hypothetical budget isn't especially meaningful for people. It makes more sense to see what they're doing right now and then sort of make a plan around it. What do you think of that methodology?
I think that's really smart because the idea of following your money is something I would say most people probably have not done in their life. I went through this exercise after reading the book Your Money or Your Life, a classic personal finance book by Vicki Robbins. It came out decades ago at this point, but they recently updated it. And she has this exercise where she recommends that you follow every single penny that comes into or goes out of your life. And I'm typically not that granular with my spending, but I did do it for a month. And it's eye-opening seeing what you're spending your money on. And it really does show you where your priorities lie. And it's okay that sometimes it's like that coffee that you really didn't need but just wanted in that moment. It's just going with where you happen to want to spend your money. And you may not be fully aware of that until you actually take the time to follow your transactions and see how you might want to retool what you're doing with your money. So I think that's a really good way just to get a baseline.
Yeah, I am a big proponent of tracking your spending and a big fan of Vicki. She's been on this show in the past and she's just fantastic. As I was talking about earlier in the show, Time Magazine reported that particularly for people and families struggling with the cost of housing, 60-30-10 might be more realistic for people these days. Do you think that housing has just gotten so out of line that we should be tweaking our rules, or do you think we should all just be looking to move someplace less expensive?
Well, as someone who bought a house in 2021 that's in the middle of nowhere in rural coastal Washington, I can say that did make my housing costs go down tremendously, but I realize that's not realistic for everyone. And the way I think about it is this with the 50-30-20 budget. It's almost like a platonic ideal of what a budget could be. If your income and your expenses fit into this framework, you will be really likely to make meaningful progress on your financial goals. But we know that keeping your needs expenses to 50% hasn't been possible for a lot of people for a long time, especially those living in high cost of living cities. I mean, I've certainly had times in my life where I was paying more than half of my income toward rent alone, and that made it virtually impossible to save money. So in that case, you can adjust these categories in a way that works for you. So maybe 60-30-10 might be more realistic. I also think maybe 60-20-20 might be even better, where you allocate 20% of your incomes to wants and then 20% to debt payments and savings. To your point earlier about having 10% going towards savings, that's really important. And if you're doing just 10% spread between extra debt payments and savings, I get concerned about people not really being able to save enough and then not being able to cover an emergency expense that may pop up, for example.
Yeah, I agree with you. And sometimes I think we can fudge the numbers a little bit and maybe get an extra 5% out of matching dollars for our employers. And that way the whole pie is 105%. And that just makes it a little bit easier all around. Aside from buying a home in rural Washington or West Virginia, where I come from originally, what are some ways that you think that we can deal with these higher than anticipated needs numbers? I mean, if we look at the cost of not just homes, but home insurance, cars, car insurance, utilities, gasoline, groceries, they're all up more than wages over the past couple of years. Any tricks that you use to maneuver in these tighter times?
I think it requires a certain amount of creativity and compromise. When I was spending more than half of my income on rent, I ended up moving in with my partner. We kind of U-hauled it at the time. We were in our mid-20s. We had only known each other for maybe 9 months to a year. And that was a big risk, but we did it because it made sense for us on a very practical level in that moment. And fortunately, it worked out. We're still living together to this day. So for other people, that might mean getting a roommate or relocating. I understand that moving can be quite expensive, but think about what that break-even point might be after you do move to a more affordable apartment. And also, I know it might sound kind of cliche or old-fashioned or corny, but seriously, couponing is something that I don't think gets enough credit nowadays. There's never been more coupons available to us on apps. I recently interviewed this woman who's part of the Crazy Coupon Lady duo, and she is a tremendous advocate for getting the coupons that are available to all of us for free and making the most of them. I do that through my grocery store app where I do just curbside pickup regularly, and I'm able to shave off a few dollars here and there, which does add up over time, especially when groceries are expensive. So I think at the end of the day, it's about finding where you are spending the most amount of your money in your needs category, and how can you think of a different approach to shaving off a little bit of money here and there that will add up over time to give you more that you can put towards your wants or your debt payments and savings.
We just had an expert on the show who was talking about couponing at drugstores, at the CVS and the Rite Aid and the Walgreens, and how if you can sort of learn their systems, because they're constantly pumping out coupons every time you pay for things, especially if you have their loyalty card, that can be a really effective thing to do as well.
GoodRx, I would add, if you're familiar with that, there's an app called GoodRx where you can put your prescriptions in and you can see which pharmacy near you has the best price on it. I find that really handy. I also find it frustrating because it underscores how, I don't know, the word disturbed comes to mind. Our healthcare system is that you can just download this app and suddenly save $50 on a prescription. But those things go really far as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk about cash stuffing? Cash stuffing is this budgeting method that has recently blown up on TikTok, where every month you take out enough cash for all your expenses and then you spread them out to envelopes that are devoted to different categories. And I get it. First of all, I get it because this is what my grandmother did. Second,
Yes.
except it wasn't on TikTok and it wasn't called cash stuffing. And I also get it because psychologically, we know that it's actually tougher to part with cash than it is to swipe a card. It's just more real. But there is this part of me that lives in a city that says, I don't know about keeping all that cash around. What do you think?
I'm right there with you. Well, first of all, I do find it hilarious that this trend has come back. It's like every 20 years, like fashion trends are on a 20-year cycle, they say, and it seems like personal finance trends might be as well. But I find cash stuffing to be really handy if that's how your brain works. If you know that you're not going to spend more once you have that limit, great, because a lot of personal finance management is self-management and knowing the tricks that will help you do what you want and not overspend. And so it can work in that sense, but I do get really concerned about people carrying a lot of cash with them, because what if you lose your wallet or someone grabs your bag on the street? Any number of things could happen and then all of your money is gone. I find that very risky. And personally, as someone who doesn't use a lot of cash, whenever I do have it, I almost have the opposite experience where it's much easier to spend. It doesn't feel real in the way that signing does for me, because that's how I've been trained to spend and account for my own money. So again, if it does work for you and you can keep yourself contained from overspending through that, and you have a secure way of making sure your money isn't going to slip out into the ether of the city, by all means, go for it. But you have to be really cautious and keep tight control over that cash and maybe not bring all of it with you when you're leaving the house.
Sean, our listeners know my story. They know that I was a money mess until I started working as a personal finance reporter, at which point I just let these really smart experts that I was interviewing tell me what to do, and I did it. How did you get smart about money?
A very similar way. My background is in journalism. I used to write for small publications in cities like a small town, Vermont, Chicago, where I'm from originally, and then the Bay Area. NerdWallet brought me on about 8 years ago when I was 24 or almost 25 at the time. And much like you, I really enjoyed not thinking about my money. I was a bit of a mess. I would go weeks without looking at my checking account, and it wasn't because I had a ton of money in there. And I was put on the debt beat. And so I got a crash course in how things can go wrong for people, sometimes through no fault of their own, just because the world is challenging and expensive. So I talked with many, many experts. Many of them were my own colleagues who knew much more than me and were experts in their own right, and got an understanding of, okay, this is my time to actually better my life, see how I can use the products at my disposal and the funds that I have coming in to save money for the first time in my life, invest for the first time in my life, and hopefully over many years actually make myself less of a financial mess. And it's worked out so far, knock on wood.
Amazing. And Sean, are you ready for a few listener questions?
I think so.
Okie doke, here we go. I'm going to read the first one and we will take it from there. It says, "Hi, Jean and Sean. I just moved from the city to the suburbs and I'm buying a car for the first time in 10 years. So my question is, should I consider leasing, buying new, or buying used this year? I'd like an electric car, but I'm worried about being able to find charging stations and the cost. Do you think the cost of electrics is going to go down in the next few years? Thanks, Tanya." Thanks for the question, Tanya. So Sean, what do you think? And I'll weigh in as well.
I love this question because it's one that I have been mulling over myself over the past few years. And I really love that Tanya is thinking about all of the available options that they have. I will say that the trend in electric vehicles does seem like they're getting more affordable. We saw Tesla slash their prices last year in part because of market pressures from other manufacturers that are having more semi-affordable price electric vehicles. And also on the question of charging, I think depending on what kind of suburb they're moving to, they should be able to find chargers fairly easily. It seems like every grocery store has a section in their parking lot nowadays where you can plug in, and of course you can charge at your house or your apartment building as well. So it's never been a better time to think about getting an electric vehicle, actually.
Yeah, I agree, but I have to say I'm a little bit more nervous about it. I do think that we're going to see the cost of electrics continue to go down, although you have to balance that with the fact that right now there are still some pretty good tax breaks, and we're not necessarily sure if those will continue to be around. But Tanya, I live in a city. I was not quite ready to commit to being able to charge my car when I needed to charge it. And I think you also have to think about how long you expect to drive distance-wise. If you are a real road warrior, if your car is the means that you use to go on long trips over the weekend or long vacations, I might be more comfortable with a hybrid at this point, simply because I was in a car driving from, and granted, this is a focus group of one, and I blame my friend Gary, but I was in a car driving from Boston back to New York when the range on his Tesla dropped like I have seen the gas gauge on my car drop, which is to say, it drops really slowly and then all at once. And we went from having 50 miles to 40 miles to 14 miles. And I was like, okay, you got to find a charger right now. I was not comfortable. So I think you have to think about how you're going to use this vehicle, how long you're likely to have the next vehicle, and make your decision based on those points. Did you ultimately get an electric, Sean?
I did not. I bought a car actually in 2020 when prices were really low, right before they shot up. So I'm fortunate for that. It doesn't even have 60,000 miles on it. I'm planning to drive this thing into the ground. But I'm hoping that after this car is spent, the electric technology will be even better, and we won't have as much range anxiety, as they call it. There will be even more charging stations, and ideally charging will be faster, because that is kind of my hang up too. I like a good road trip. I don't want to be waiting 30 minutes at a charging station to either get to the charger because someone else is charging and then just to charge my own car. But that said, if Tanya thinks that they're going to be just around the city or the suburb where they are located primarily, leasing actually might be a great idea for them because the technology is advancing so rapidly that at the end of maybe a 3-year lease, you will be able to swap that in for something that has even better technology, even better range, and you're not stuck with this car that is a little bit outdated. And we're seeing car manufacturers, even right now, adapt their charging ports. A lot of them are going over to the Tesla port, for example. Whereas if you bought a different electric car like 3 years ago, you might have to get some sort of attachment to use these other chargers. It's a bit clunky at the moment. So I'm hoping that the electric market will sort of figure itself out. And then in 5 or so years, everything will be more stable and I'll be able to get my first electric vehicle. But we'll see.
We'll see. We'll be right there with you. Okay, one more question. This one comes from Denise. Denise says, "Hi, Gene and Sean. My credit card debt has skyrocketed since my APRs went from 17% to 32%. I can barely make a dent with my balances due to the high interest charges each month. I've heard about debt consolidation to lower the APR, but they close all the accounts you consolidate. Will this harm my credit? Should I consolidate all but one to keep an emergency card? Currently, my emergency savings are below $800. I have a child in college that I'm paying tuition for, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I'm a single mom with college-age children, put money in an IRA monthly, and have PERS retirement with the college I work for in Oregon. I earn $78,000 a year. Any advice would be so appreciated." Boy, I know there are a lot of people who can empathize with that credit card debt skyrocketing these days and the interest rates going sky high. What do you think?
I really feel for this listener too. The high interest rates on credit cards right now can make paying off debt extremely difficult. And Denise, you're not alone. NerdWallet's 2023 household credit card debt report found that 2 in 5 Americans with revolving credit card debt say that rising interest rates are a roadblock to paying it off in the next 12 months. So first of all, know that you're not alone. It doesn't make it any easier in some ways, but hopefully it makes you feel a little bit less lonely. But realize that you have a lot of options at your disposal, and you might be able to make this debt more affordable without closing out any of these cards. One thing that I like to recommend people do before they do something that's a little bit more drastic, like a debt consolidation loan, is simply calling up their credit card company, explain their situation, and see if the company might be willing to just lower their interest rate. They can do that. They also might be able to put Denise or anyone else really into a hardship program where they lower your interest rate and waive fees for a set period of time. In this case, the worst thing they can say is no, you're not going to be penalized for asking for this. But again, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. I would say just be kind and patient as you explain your situation and realize that you might be on the phone for quite a while to get one of these options approved.
Yeah, absolutely. You can also, without looking at a debt consolidation loan, if your credit score is good, you can look at a balance transfer, which could lower at least the highest of those interest rates to very close to zero for a 12-month period, generally, sometimes even longer, which can give you the ability to just wail on some of that debt. And then when it comes to a debt consolidation loan, because you're looking at an option right now where your credit cards would be closed anyway, I'd encourage you to look instead at a not-for-profit credit counselor. A not-for-profit credit counselor is an organization that will basically do the same thing. They have preset agreements with the creditors to lower your interest rates to around 6%, and then you make one payment a month to them. They pay off your cards. It typically takes between 4 and 5 years to get through a not-for-profit credit counseling program, what they call a debt management program. And although your credit score does go down initially because it is reflected on your credit report, by the time you come out, what many people find is that their credit score has gone right back up and you're in good shape.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Jean. because a lot of people aren't aware about these nonprofit credit counseling agencies, and there are plenty of trusted organizations around the country that will offer a debt management plan like this. The only caveat that I like to caution is that if you are considering one of these, get a second opinion from a bankruptcy attorney. I know it sounds scary, but really it's not, because bankruptcy is one of the fastest ways to resolve your debt. You can sometimes be cleared from a Chapter 7 in just a matter of months, and your scores will rebound fairly quickly after that. So I would say weigh your options really carefully and think about how long you might want to be in this debt.
Such a good point. And a good not-for-profit credit counselor will actually tell you during the intake process if bankruptcy is the right move for you, but they're not all equally good. So so Sean's point is really, really valuable. Denise, let us know what happens. Good luck with all of this. And Sean, thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Jean. This was a joy to talk with you.
Where can our listeners find out more about you and the work that you're doing at Smart Money?
You can find NerdWallet's Smart Money podcast everywhere that podcasts are found. You can follow me on Instagram at SeanPyles_NerdWallet, where I post additional videos about the podcast. And of course, NerdWallet.com for anything and everything personal financially.
Thanks again, Sean.